Welcome back to the Now Morning Show, and this morning we're going to continue the conversation as we focus on CARICOM, because we're joined by Mr. Jean-Pascal Van Ypersele, who is the special envoy of Belgian government to the CARICOM summit this morning, as we discuss the real truths about climate change and the existential threat to CARICOM members. Now, Mr. Jean-Pascal has over 40 years experience in climate science and diplomacy. He was also the vice chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that's the IPCC, and is a full professor of climate and sustainable development. And so Mr. Jean-Pascal joins us this morning. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Very fine, and you?
I'm good. So I have so many questions before we jump into the interview, but let me just get a bit about yourself first. So I understand that you're, in terms of climate scientist, you're also the special envoy. Tell us, because I also understand you're an author as well.
Yeah, I was an author of the IPCC report number 3.
Yes.
And I also accompanied the writing of the 4th and the 5th assessment report. This is the 6th one. This is the summary of the 6th one.
Right.
And now I'm running to get the chair position to accompany the 7th one, which starts in August and will last for the next 5 to 7 years.
Interesting. Now, with over 40 years of experience in climate science and diplomacy, are there certain topics that you focus on particularly?
Well, originally I'm a physicist, okay? So I'm a climate scientist working on the modeling of the climate system. You know, if we use a computer to simulate the behavior of the climate system, we can do with those climate models, with those computer models, experiments that we cannot do in the reality.
Yes.
And we can see what happens if we increase the amount of greenhouse gases, CO2, for example, which is one of the gases generated by human activity when you burn things, when you burn coal, oil, gas, or wood.
Yes.
And it's a gas which traps the heat in the climate system and which contributes to the heating of the climate system, the heating, which explains why we have today 1.1 degrees C more already than 150 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm a scientist studying those aspects originally, but I've also worked on many other aspects of climate change, including how to adapt to climate change, the part of climate change we cannot avoid anymore, how to move our economy to a cleaner economy. I worked with engineers, with economists, with philosophers even on the ethical aspects of climate change, because there are ethical aspects as well. I mean, you know, the responsibilities for the climate change that's happening lie mostly in the north, because developed countries have emit the bulk of the greenhouse gases, and so there are ethical aspects as well, and I've published with philosophers on those aspects as well.
Very nice. What I'm also interested as well is in your tie. I love 1.5. Tell us about that.
Well, you know, 1.5 degrees C above the pre-industrial temperature, the temperature that reigned 150 or 200 years ago, is the target that was enshrined in the Paris Agreement in 2015, because the IPCC has demonstrated at length that the impacts of climate change in multiple categories would be much more severe if we would allow the temperature to go above 1.5 degrees C. So actually, it's not I love 1.5, it's I love staying below 1.5, but it's too long to write, because it's essential, particularly for small island states, to keep the temperature and the warming as low as possible, because otherwise, you know, it's the existence itself of some small islands which is at stake, because with the warming comes an increase in sea level for a number of reasons. And if the sea level increases by several meters, which might happen in the future, in the distant future, if we don't master the warming, well, it's the existence itself of many island states which is threatened.
I think so. I remember I was looking at a documentary recently on Miami, and they have started to build walls so that because their sea levels are also rising, and you're seeing that increase as well. So I hope that we don't have to get to a level where we have to raise our roadways, because we might be at risk of, the water coming into the roadways.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. I know that you're running for the chairman. Tell us about the IPCC and also the importance of having an organization like that.
The IPCC was created by the UN General Assembly, so all countries of the world, in 1988. So we are going to celebrate the 35th anniversary of IPCC. I know CARICOM is celebrating its 50th anniversary. IPCC will celebrate its 35th anniversary. And it was created to provide decision makers and policy makers of all kinds in the world with the best quality scientific information to give a foundation to their decisions. So the IPCC is not there to prescribe anything, it's not there to say you have to do this or you have to do that. That's the job of policymakers, but it's there to inform about what's happening in the climate system, what is really happening, what is the truth about what's happening in the climate system, what are the causes of the changes we are seeing, but also about the consequences according to different potential scenarios, whether we stay on a high course in terms of global emissions of CO2 and other greenhouse gases, or whether we succeed to bend the curve, like for COVID, we had to bend the curve. For CO2 and greenhouse gases, we have to bend the curve too, the curve of emissions. We have to reach a peak as soon as possible and then decrease those emissions so that, the insulating layer that we're actually installing without realizing it around the planet stops increasing in thickness, because we know if we add insulation layer, whether it's clothes or other insulating material around us, we get warmer. And well, that's what's happening. But the IPCC is also there to inform about the elements of solutions that are available, both in the area of adaptation to the part of climate change that is there already, and in the area of prevention, mitigation of the part of climate change we can still prevent. So the IPCC has a very important role to inform policymakers and decision makers of all kinds, including citizens, about what is happening, but also what can be done about it, what is needed in terms of changes, including in terms of funding. And that's a very important issue that is discussed here at the CARICOM meeting.
I like that you mentioned funding, because I know one of the things that we talk about, and by we I mean us in the Caribbean, is the lack of funding that we get to sort of promote these climate changes or these climate change methods and policies that we want to see here. And I know one of the places that is discussed a lot is at the COP that they usually have.
That's right.
And so as we look forward to COP28 in Dubai, tell us some of the topics we can probably see policymakers coming together to discuss, especially as it relates to us here in the Caribbean.
Well, I'm coming from Belgium. I'm not coming from a small island state. We have a coast as well, by the way, so we are also up to a point threatened by sea level rise, but not to the extent as CARICOM. But I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of people living on small islands. And in that position, I would be extremely frustrated, because developed countries have promised already 15 years ago, in 2009, in Copenhagen, that was COP15, we're now about to go to COP28, to provide developing countries with $100 billion per year for climate finance, in part for climate adaptation, in part for climate mitigation. And that money is still not there. Counting, very creatively, the best numbers that one can find is about $80 billion per year for last year. But it's not even 100 billion. And 100 billion at the world scale is actually not such a large amount compared to what the IPCC in its last report said was necessary to adapt on one side, transform the world economy into a much cleaner economy that would be much more climate friendly and also more sustainable development friendly, This is the pin of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, that are so important to reach as well, in addition to climate protection, which is one of the goals, but only one of them. And so the frustration is immense in developing countries and in small island states in general, because the developed countries have not met their promises. And if you read the IPCC reports, the gap between the amount of finance that is available, both for adaptation, mitigation, and the new issue that has been getting an increasing importance over the years, is the funding of the loss and damages. Because, unfortunately, because there has not been enough mitigation of the problem, not enough adaptation to the part of the problem which is there already, there are losses and damages. There are people losing their homes. There are infrastructure which are broken by floods, by extreme winds, by hurricanes. There are people losing their lives because of heat waves and health issues associated to climate change. So the issue of loss and damage is receiving an increasing level of attention. It was very visible in Glasgow at COP26 2 years ago. A decision to start to establish a fund. It's not formally established yet, but was taken in Sharm el-Sheikh at COP27. But you know, it needs to become operational. And the fund needs to be filled as well with money, otherwise it's useless. And that's one of the issues to be discussed at COP28.
But then, so then what can we as small island states do in the interim? We're waiting for funding. We are hoping to get funding from these larger corporations. I mean, is it as simple as, you know, checking our carbon footprint, for example? What small steps do we take at this time to assist us in keeping our numbers or keeping that world number below 1.5?
You know, climate change is really a global problem, a global issue. And CO2, which is that invisible gas which traps heat in the system, has the same role whether it's emitted in Port of Spain, in New York, in Brussels, or anywhere in the world. So that means that the contribution, the efforts of everyone is important to reduce emissions. That being said, we also know that the footprint you mentioned, the carbon footprint, is much larger in developed countries, and it's there that the most important reductions need to take place, because that's where the effect is the largest. On the other hand, the contributions of smaller emitters is also important, because at the end of the day, those CO2 emissions, wherever they come from, are added, and they all matter. So indeed, the contributions in CARICOM countries to reduce emissions are very important as well. And, you know, going to renewable energy, I heard yesterday that your wind potential, for example, is of the order of 40 gigawatts. That's the equivalent of 40 big nuclear reactors. If it was developed offshore, your wind potential is huge. You have a lot of sun too. So your solar potential is important as well. When I came here, I was surprised to see so little solar panels on roofs. So you have a potential to go in that direction, which is actually very large. So, yeah, CARICOM countries can do a lot too. But the main responsibility lies with developed countries.
Of course. Well, let me thank you so much for coming in, of course, Mr. Jean-Pascal. Any closing thoughts you want to leave with us? Because I know you'll be on your way pretty soon. Any closing thoughts you want to leave with us before you go? And please show us that your pair of socks, because I know that is also key to your movement as well.
Well, the socks are showing the evolution of temperature over the last 100 years. And you see how over the last 20, the increase has been particularly visible. Yeah, acting on climate change is very urgent. We can do it if we want, but we need much more political will at the world level. We need the participation of all, and the IPCC is the body to inform policymakers of the world in the best manner. I want the IPCC, if I am elected chair of IPCC, to be the global voice of climate, but the global voice of climate being the only party at COPs which doesn't have a voice, which cannot speak. And the science of climate change, all the sciences related to climate change, need to have a speaker, and the IPCC need to be that speaker, and I want the IPCC to do that and to serve the community, north and south, east and west, in the best manner.
And Mr. Van E. Pacelli, let me thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you
we
very
appreciate
much.
all the work that you're doing. And if elected, I'm going to be keeping my eye on what the IPCC does in terms of informing us about climate change and how we really, really need to ensure that our global temperatures remain below that 1.5. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kimberly.
And that was Mr. Jean-Pascal Van E. Pacelli, Special Envoy of Belgium and also a climate scientist, just sharing about, you know, the importance of climate change and how you can get on board with keeping that global temperature between, well, below actually 1.5. You're on the Now Morning Show. We're going to take a break and be right back. Stay with us.
Mother Earth, so much harvest you deliver, yet we take you.